fellow Falcoholics, welcome to another edition of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight, at Falcoholic Kevin on Twitter, here to bring you the first in what will be a series of videos talking about the Falcons' cap space and how they can free up some space and get out of this disastrous cap situation, or possibly not so disastrous cap situation, depending on what the NFL decides to do with the salary cap in 2021. But we're going to take a look over the course of the next few weeks, going into free agency and all that good stuff, about getting the Falcons under the cap. How hard is it going to be? What sort of moves can they make? Is the cap going to go down? That's a big deal, whether or not it does. We're going to break into all of these things, and hopefully by the time we're done, you guys will have a better understanding of where the Falcons stand and why the situation might not be quite so dire as it is painted by many in the media. People have often remarked that the Falcons have one of the least desirable GM and head coach openings because of the cap situation, and it's really not as bad as all that. So first of all, let me just say that most of my information will be coming from overthecap.com. Another good site is spotrac.com. These two sites have a little bit of a difference in their numbers right now. I don't really understand why. For instance, Spotrac has the Falcons with about 2.77 million in cap left from 2020, whereas Over the Cap has the Falcons with nearly 6 million in leftover cap from 2020. And those numbers do matter in terms of what the Falcons will be able to do, because that space will carry over to 2021. So whether it's 6 or more like 3 could make a big difference at the margins. But the numbers are still a little bit in flux right now because the new year hasn't started. We're getting some reserve future contracts signed and all of these things. So don't take the numbers in here as absolute gospel. Some things could change going into the deeper parts of the offseason. And we also don't know at this point whether the NFL is going to drop the salary cap to 178 million or 175 million, which is the lowest it could go according to what they agreed upon in the offseason, or whether they're going to keep it flat, or whether they're going to increase it, or all of these things, because that will make a huge deal for the Falcons and for a lot of teams in the NFL. And we will get into that in this video, but those are things we don't know, and we just have to kind of make assumptions about. For me, I'm assuming that the cap is going to stay flat because, for many reasons, dropping it to 175 would be devastating for the product on the field. More than half of the teams in the NFL would then be over the cap going into 2021. And I just don't think the NFL is likely to do something like that. I think they'll figure out a way to keep the cap about where it is. And that would make a big difference for the Falcons and for a lot of teams especially. So I'm going to work under the assumption that the cap is going to be flat, which means it's going to be right around 198 million going into 2021. That could change. So just for the record, those are the numbers that I'm going to be working off of going forward. So without further ado, let's get to part one of this series, which is what some easy quote-unquote moves the Falcons can do. And we're going to be talking about some veteran cuts that Atlanta can make to possibly get them under the cap, possibly get them some breathing room in 2021. So before we get to the exact veterans the team has the chance to move on from in 2021 that can free up a fair amount of space, as we're going to see, just want to give you guys a quick primer on where the Falcons stand going into 2021 with the salary cap. Like I said, we don't know if it's going to be 175, 178 million, or if it's going to be flat, like 195, 198 million, something like that. I assume that it's going to be flat, but just for the record, some quick numbers. So Over the Cap assumes the worst. They assume that the cap will go down to 178 million. So if you look at overthecap.com, it's going to show you the Falcons are minus 24.3 million going into 2021, with only 31 players under contract, which, as you might understand from those very basic numbers, that is not good. Because the team still needs to field another 22 players, and they're already 24 million under. This is part of the reason why I don't think this is going to happen, right? Because the Falcons are not even the worst team. The Saints and the Eagles and several other teams are in very dire straits if the NFL were to do this. So I'm not going to guess that the NFL is going to drop this and force teams to move on from a ton of veteran players, and it's going to decrease the amount of talent on the field. I mean, this is just, all of these things are things that the NFL generally avoids. So if you take the cap and you put it flat, so you make it 198 million like it is in 2020, that means that the Falcons will be minus 4 million, give or take, on the cap. So at the end of the day, not that bad. That's much more workable, especially since there are plenty of moves the team can make. And if you also add in the fact that the team has somewhere between 2.77 million to 5.9 million in rollover from 2020, they might already be under the cap once that number becomes official and gets rolled over into 2021. Because in case you guys don't know, any cap space you have left over from a previous year, you get to roll it over to the next year. There are limits to how much you can roll over. Like, you can't roll over 200 million to the next year and all that sort of stuff, but you can roll over a significant amount. So the Falcons, that, 3 to 6 million in that window could already get them under the cap, depending on what the NFL decides to do here. So going into it, they're pretty close, I think, to being close to zero net. So that's kind of where we're starting, is that the team needs to sign 20-something players and draft picks and all this stuff, and they have about $0 in space as it stands now. So after that, there are three veteran players that the team has an opportunity to move on from in 2021 that make a lot of sense. The first one, and I'm sure you've probably heard these names before, but the first one is Ricardo Allen, the safety. So Allen will be going into his age 30 season in 2021. Everyone loves Allen. He was a great story. He came back from some truly devastating injuries and had some very quality years with the Falcons, but his 2020 was not impressive. He looked like he had lost a step, and he just wasn't anywhere near as effective as the starter at free safety. And the bad news for Ricardo Allen is that his cap hit in 2021 is $8.375 million, which is a lot of money to play to someone who's not even playing at the level of a solid starter. So the good news for the Falcons is that Ricardo Allen's contract, this is his final season, and it's very easy to get out of. So the Falcons can save $6.25 million by cutting Ricardo Allen. They will pick up $2.1 million in dead cap, but the amount that they save makes that dead cap not that big of a deal, especially in a situation like we're seeing now, where that space might be very vital to fielding a team and having a little bit of free agency flexibility in 2021. So picking up $6 million in cap savings from Ricardo Allen, that makes a lot of sense for this team. The flip side of that is the team is going to need a new starter at free safety going into 2021. So that is something to keep in mind. There's been a lot of mock drafts where the Falcons do target a free safety, so this could be, something they address in the draft, and that's probably what they're going to have to do in 2021. The next guy that we're going to take a look at is defensive lineman Alan Bailey, who was actually a very obvious cut candidate going into 2020, and Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff kind of inexplicably extended him a year. And that was always a very bizarre decision to me, because he wasn't good when he played in 2019, and he obviously didn't really make an impact in 2020, and he's being paid over $4 million a year on his contract. He is, once again, an obvious cut candidate for 2021. His cap number is $6.1 million for a guy that really doesn't provide much of anything. I like his flexibility as an inside-outside guy, but this is not an impact player by any means. Not someone you're spending $6 million on, for sure. And the Falcons can save a whopping $4.5 million by moving on from Bailey. And they only lose $1.6 million from his in dead money from his cut. So that's an obvious cut. To me, I don't think Bailey really offered you a ton to begin with, and he just wasn't a really good fit in a 4-3. It just wasn't something he looked comfortable in. He didn't really make a lot of impact plays, and he'll be 32 in 2021. So I don't see any situation where a new coaching staff will hang on to him next season when they can free up that amount of money for that little dead cap. So he's an obvious one going forward. The last guy that is a truly easy quote-unquote cut is James Carpenter, who was the Falcons' starting left guard in 2021. Now, this one is slightly more questionable because the savings versus dead cap is a little bit more even, and Carpenter did improve a lot in 2020 compared to his abysmal 2019 season, the first year with the team, where he looked awful. So 2020, he was fine for the most part. He was a solid starter, I would say. But if the Falcons are in desperate need of cap space, they do. He's getting paid almost $6.5 million in 2021 and 2022, and the team could save $4 million by moving on from Carpenter. They would also save, $5.25 million in 2022, which is nothing to shake a stick at all there. The problem is that he does cost the team $2.4 million in dead cap. So, the ratio of savings to dead cap is not quite as favorable as it is for the other two that we've mentioned. But it also creates the problem of now you have no left guard starter. So is the team going to try to play Matt Gono there? He wasn't terribly impressive. Are they going to draft someone? Those are the types of questions the team is going to have to ask by cutting someone like James Carpenter. But the savings might be too much for them to really argue with. So those are the three really obvious veteran moves. There is one more that I will touch on here because if the team really needs cap space, like if they get into this really nightmare scenario of the cap where it does drop to 178 or whatever the lowest number is, there is another player they can cut as a post-June 1st cut. And if you follow me on Twitter, you've heard me talking about it. That player is Dante Fowler Jr., the Falcons' $16 million man. That's right. He's getting paid a whopping $18.6 million cap hit in 2021. And he got all of, 2.5 sacks in 2020. So clearly not worth that sort of contract. And if you make him a post-June 1st cut, you can recoup $8 million in cap savings in 2021, which is not a small amount. The downside of that, obviously, is that he's going to cost the team $10.6 million in dead cap. Now, there's still a net savings that the Falcons get on this cut, but that's a lot of money to pay someone that's not on your team still. $10 million is nothing to shake a stick at either. But if they desperately need that space, maybe the new coaching staff wants to send a message to overpriced veterans. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on that, but he is someone that could free up a lot of space. The other thing that we should mention is that if the team does make these two cuts that I recommended in terms of Allen Bailey and Dante Fowler, there are now no edge players under contract whatsoever for the Falcons in 2021. So that is another issue. They have certainly some guys they could re-sign easily, like Jacob Mariner, who's an exclusive rights free agent, which means, for those that don't know, he has to sign with the Falcons for the vet minimum if the Falcons want him. So, they can get Jacob Mariner back for pennies, and they might re-sign guys like Steven Means or Charles Harris or something like that. They're almost certainly going to draft players, but it's worth mentioning that they will be going into 2021 with no edge players under contract if they do cut both Allen Bailey and Dante Fowler. So that is something to keep in mind for the Falcons going forward with these, if they do end up making some of these cuts. So guys, there you have it. 3 quote-unquote easy and 1 quote-unquote not so easy cuts for the Falcons to make going into 2021. If they were to make the first 3 moves, which I consider to be pretty obvious moves that are likely to happen one way or the other, that would net the team $14.79 million in cap savings, which when combined with my theoretical flat cap probably gets the team, about 14 to 12 million, somewhere in that range in terms of cap space, which is enough probably to sign the draft class, enough to start filling out the roster with some minimum sort of veterans and the like. So that would give the team some breathing room and allow them to start making some easy signings and have, the breathing room for that draft class. So that's important. If they add Dante Fowler to that mix and they do make him a post-June 1st cut, they will get some of that money up front, but with the post-June 1st cut, they don't get all of it until later in the season. But they would save a total of $22.79 million, which again opens up the door for some more moves, possibly some re-signings, as long as they aren't too expensive. Keanu Neal is a guy I'm sure they would like to retain. So, we'll see. There are some other moves the team can make that we're going to get into going forward, and those are going to be coming, over the next couple weeks here as we get more into the offseason. But this is the baseline moves that the Falcons have here, the very quote-unquote easy cuts in terms of contracts that are easy to be moved on from, that provide a good ratio of cap savings to dead cap hit. There really, and the downside of the Falcons is there really aren't any other obvious cut candidates other than the ones I mentioned. Like, there's really not anything where you're netting any sort of significant savings at all. There's a few, you can claw back a few million here and there off of a few contracts, but it's minimal. So you're really working with a very little flexibility outside of the aforementioned 3 cuts and possibly Dante Fowler. So they're not in a situation where they're going to be flush with cap space in any scenario, but they do have a little bit more breathing room, and they're not going to have to start just axing veterans to get under the cap by any means necessary. So it's not as bad as maybe you've been led to believe by some. Now, I could be wrong, and the NFL dumps the cap down to 178 million, and we're in a mad dash just to get under, but I just don't really see that happening. So I'm gonna, go on thinking that we're not gonna have to deal with that particular eventuality. But guys, thank you for tuning in to part 1 of our Falcons cap space series. If you don't mind, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. You can check us out on Patreon to unlock some exclusive benefits like exclusive fan Q&As and access to high quality audio downloads of our episodes in podcast format for those of you that prefer the podcasts. Check out our community Discord server and follow the show at Falcoholic Live on Twitter if you do that Twitter stuff. So again, guys, thank you for tuning in. Join us also on Wednesday night for our live broadcast, and that's a lot of fun. We're going to be doing that all the way up through the draft. So if you want to get some live questions in, that sort of thing, check us out Wednesday nights at 8:10 p.m. Eastern. Otherwise, guys, thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Falcoholic Live.